Hello and welcome to the Thursday, April 9th, 2026 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich, recording today from Jacksonville, Florida. And just as a reminder that there will be no Friday podcast due to my travel schedule. And this episode is brought to you by the SANS.edu Credit Certificate Program in Industrial Control System Security. Well, in Diaries today, I wrote a little bit about how attackers are attempting to fingerprint honeypots, in particular the honeypots we are using, like the little Python script we use to emulate web applications, and Cowrie, of course, that is being used to emulate Telnet and SSH. Well, those kind of honeypots are often considered medium interaction honeypots, meaning that they try to emulate particular vulnerable or non-vulnerable devices, but are, of course, far from perfect, and that makes it relatively straightforward to fingerprint them and making sure that a particular device is a honeypot. Now, one trick that this particular attacker, researchers, whoever it was, did employ was to use username password combinations that would definitely not show up in a normal system. So, for example, well, the username was admin and the password then definitely not valid creds, or usernames like honeypot and honeypotter. The idea behind this is that, for example, Cowrie that we're using to emulate Telnet and SSH, well, it will sort of randomly accept username and password combinations. So it will not just accept very specific ones, but ever so often it will let basically an attacker in no matter what username and password they're using to see what commands they may be executing. And that's what they're looking for. If they're able to actually log in with a username like honeypotter, well, they assume then that they are connected to a honeypot, which is a fairly fair assumption. Are we working on making it a little bit harder to fingerprint honeypots? Yes, we always sort of look into this and may actually be adding some features to sort of, not allow logins from specific usernames or passwords, but not really a high priority because, like I said, it's always possible to fingerprint these honeypots, and we are not really sort of after the 0 days or the targeted attacks, but really more after attacks that are just scanning the internet. And some concerns were raised today by 3 different security-related Microsoft developers' accounts being suspended. What we had here was wireguard, veracrypt, windscribe. These are the 3 accounts that are apparently affected. There may be others, but these are the ones where I sort of found notice about. And pretty much the same happened to all 3, where they are no longer able to publish updates to their respective applications. Now, WireGuard and windscribe are both VPN applications. Veracrypt, a disk encryption application. All of these are well-respected projects that have been going on for quite a few years. So it's not really clear what's happening here, but of course, these particular projects are sort of privacy related. And as a result, there's of course always some concern that various regulation and such in countries that do no longer allow VPNs or end-to-end encryption may be targeting projects like this. The most likely reason that I found for this particular issue is that starting in April, well, we are in April and we have Patch Tuesday next Tuesday. So starting next Tuesday, Microsoft is actually changing some policies around signing drivers and also bootloaders, which affects in particular code like veracrypt. If you are using basically a fully encrypted disk with veracrypt, then you need a special veracrypt bootloader to decrypt the disk as you are booting the system. Well, so far there were some co-signed, dual-signed solutions that were offered. They're going away in April. Now, I have no idea why they would lock the accounts in response to this. These projects definitely have to basically struggle with how they're going to respond to these changes in policy. In particular, veracrypt pointed out that if you're using their product to encrypt the entire disk, so you need to use the veracrypt bootloader. well, then your system will stop booting in June when actually this will go in full effect. And with their account suspended, they will not be able to actually push any updates for you. So this, at this point, just affects Windows. Of course, we had in the past often that particular VPN software was often removed from country-specific application stores that affected pretty much all of the big sort of app stores like Apple, Android, and Microsoft. But this appears to be global and affect the developers' accounts themselves. At this point, I haven't seen any official statement from Microsoft and hope they're bringing some light behind what's actually happening here and why these accounts were suspended. If you're using any of these products, they should be working, but be aware of that veracrypt caveat here. And keep watching it for any updates. Any other versions like Linux, Mac OS are not affected at this time. This is just Microsoft and with that Windows problem. Well, I mentioned already this week a couple times the use of AI in order to find vulnerabilities. We got now a nice write-up by Horizon 3 showing how they used Claude in order to find a remote code execution vulnerability in Apache ActiveMQ. Now, first of all, Apache ActiveMQ is quite popular, so if you're running it, definitely make sure that you're up to date, that you have this issue fixed. It is a remote code execution vulnerability, but requires authentication if you run a relatively recent version of ActiveMQ. There have been some older versions, and we're talking like 2024. That's when at least the CVE came out for it, that exposed the Jolokia API, which is causing the vulnerability here to be exposed without authentication. So for these old versions, it's an unauthenticated remote code execution vulnerability. So get it patched, and if you are sort of into bug hunting and such, definitely a good write-up in how they use the Claude here to actually figure out how this particular vulnerability works. Well, and that's it for today. So thanks for listening. Thanks for liking. Thanks for subscribing. And talk to you again on Monday. Bye.